In this video, I'm going to focus on chapter 17 and maybe into 18. In chapter 17, we just before that, we've learned that Biddy has moved in with Joe and Mrs. Joe, and she's caring for Mrs. Joe. We also know that Mrs. Joe is an invalid, that she can barely communicate. And there's this one really interesting little scene at the end of chapter 16, actually, where she's trying to express something on paper, and Pip figures out that she's talking about a hammer, and then they figure out she wants Orlick, which is really strange, and Pip is suspicious because he suspects maybe Orlick has been involved in this, but she's really pleasant to Orlick, and in fact Orlick is invited every day to come and see her, and she, you know, is very kind to him and happy to see him. It's very strange. Okay, so we have Biddy living with them, and in here we realize that Pip has decided, or is attracted to Biddy, that he is starting to see her as, you know, a beautiful young woman. And he's sitting there admiring her on page 114, and he says, she had been with us more than a year when I observed to myself one evening that she had curiously thoughtful and attentive eyes that were very pretty and very good. And they have a really long conversation here, and he, you know, is wondering how she manages to be so intelligent, just like she picks it up, and he works so hard at it, and she's just so virtuous and just so wonderful. And then she kind of starts to cry, actually, because she wants him to remember that she was his first teacher. And then they're kind of going on having a conversation, and on page 116 Pip expresses his intentions, he says, or desires anyway. He tells her that he wants to be a gentleman, and she says, "Oh, I wouldn't if I was you. I don't think it would answer." And he says, "I have particular reasons for wanting to be a gentleman." "Okay, well, you know best, Pip, but don't you think you're happier as you are?" "Biddy, I am not at all happy as I am. I am disgusted with my calling, with my life. I have never taken to either since I was bound. Don't be absurd." "Am I absurd?" So their conversation goes on, and then, but Biddy is, you know, trying to just kind of offer another perspective, and he's frustrated, and he says, "I told her she was right. And I knew it was much to be regretted, but still it was not to be helped. He can't help it. He wants to be a gentleman. He cannot help it." And then he says to her, "Instead of that, see how I am going on, dissatisfied and uncomfortable, and what would it signify to me, being coarse and common, if nobody had told me so?" And she says, "That was not true or polite thing to say. Who said it?" And Pip admits that it's a beautiful young lady at Miss Havisham's. He says, "She's more beautiful than anybody ever was, and I admire her dreadfully, and I want to be a gentleman on her account." And so this conversation's going, but it's a really like sort of intriguing probing into his motivations and trying to get Pip to think about. And she's like, "Well, why? Why do you want to be a gentleman? Do you want to spite her, or do you want to win her over?" And he's like, "I don't know." And she says, "I should think, but you know best, that might be better and more independently done by caring nothing for her words. And if it is to gain her over, I should think, but you know best, she was not worth gaining over." And indeed, she is incredibly wise here, but Pip is so driven by wealth and by winning Estella and by, you know, a life of privilege and social climbing that he thinks he can't be content here. He sometimes thinks maybe he can, but he even says, "I wish I could fall in love with you, and then I'd be content." I mean, poor Biddy, right? How does she feel, hey? So Biddy, though, like Joe, is content with her social status. That's it for chapter 17. And we're going to move into the next video. I'm going to kind of wrap up the first stage of the novel, so chapters 18 and 19.